The Second Coming is essentially an allegory of apocalypse, imagining the collapse of civilization in the wake of World War One. The Second Coming is, of course, from the Book of Revelations in the Bible. The idea that the apocalypse will come, that Christ will return to earth and everything will be destroyed, and the righteous will be ushered up to heaven, and then everybody else gets sent down to hell. But the way he goes about it is really, really what's significant about this poem, because he drops all of the realism of all the realism of his political poems, all of the lyricism, the lilting, pretty lyricism of the early stuff, and now he is whole hog modernist. And in doing so, he is essentially ushering in the 20th century by writing about its destruction, which is, a little nuts, but he does it. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming! Hardly are these words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born? You can be forgiven if you have no idea what the hell that is about. And you would not be alone in that. Obviously, critics and astute readers have really dug into it and started to ferret out the meanings, but the very fact that you come out of there scratching your head and not really certain, that signals to you that this is modernism. All of these little images exist as puzzles. All of these little images are chunks of meaning that don't seem to have any obvious relation to one another. They are fragments. Fragments is very big in the modernist era, and this is essentially coining that. The intensity of these images carries a certain momentum and imbues you with a sense of their importance, but you don't know what to do with them. That is the modern age broadly. You can see that in the painting of Picasso or Matisse or any of those guys who are dealing in shards of reality that are sharp and don't fit together evenly, but that the reader is then expected to assemble into some kind of meaning. This suggests, number one, that the poet expects you to be able to do that, because at this stage they are saying goodbye. Modern art says goodbye to universal readership, essentially, to the popular art model where, plenty of people are going to be able to get this, and I'll write some stuff for for the more elevated type so that they can read into it, but I'm also going to keep it kind of simple so that people can just sort of go through on a simple level as well, and we'll have all that and everybody will be together. No, modern art is about saying, no, we don't want the people who are just looking for the simple stuff. They can go and find that in poetry and writing from a long time ago. Here, we want people who are committed and can have the resources and have the intellect and the rigor to lean in and do this work for themselves. At the same time, this is a kind of white flag of surrender to that process, because the very difficulty of this poetry suggests that the poet has given up on trying to actually communicate with anybody else. The idea of art is always that the poet or the artist has something in their head, something in their soul that they want to express. And then the audience, the readers, the viewers, the whatever, comes to that, sees that, and bridges the distance. It is a form of communion between the artist and the audience. And that model holds for centuries. But here, no. Here, this kind of art, this kind of difficulty, opaque, mind-numbingly, frustratingly, ultimately meaningless in many ways, art suggests that that can't happen, that communion cannot happen, that communication cannot happen, that what is inside of me is impossible to get out, because what it means to me inside is only viable inside my consciousness, inside my heart, inside me, and nobody else can do it. It is an image ultimately of loneliness. And loneliness is a consistent, persistent, and convulsive theme of modern art. So turning and turning, again, more recurrent. Something is turning and turning, and more sense of the history is turning and turning. The civilization itself is turning from a constant process of being reborn, falling into dissolution, and becoming destroyed only to be reborn again. This constant recurrence is going on. Yeats is reading an awful lot of Nietzsche at this point, the eternal recurrence. And so you get these images that crop up again and again and again throughout Yeats's poetry, throughout all of his work, of the turning and widening gyre, and the idea that what starts as a tight organization of turning slowly gets wider and wider and wider, and maybe less regular and more elliptical and wider, and it just dissolves. It dissipates. It falls apart. And the energy of this poem kind of matches that. What starts as some fairly close rhymes tend to fritter away towards the end. What starts as a sense of clarity tends to fritter away at the end. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. All right, so he's seeing a falcon spin around in the air, and suddenly it is losing touch with its ground. Again, the air and the ground, the ideal and the heavenly and the ground, then the dissolution of the contact between them. And here, that sense of eternally working through this process of dissolution. And those clear images at the beginning become much more uncertain as you move on. Surely some revelation, lowercase r, is at hand. Revelation meaning, okay, suddenly we're going to realize something, we're going to learn something. Surely the second coming, capitalized, is at hand, which says, oh no, that's a different kind of revelation. This is something much more apocalyptic now. And then the repeating of that, and the second coming. Hardly are these words out when the vast image of the Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Senses of art, senses of apocalypse, senses of God, and the division between humanity and the perception on earth and God. And these weird little images that crops up. A shape with a lion body and the head of a man a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, a shape with a lion body and the head of a man. These are more fragments of different living beings. Life broken into pieces. A gaze is, again, just not even a physical reality. It is an ability to appreciate art, but there is no wholeness to this. Human beings have no sense of wholeness. But that the lion body with the head of a man, that is straight out of myth. Those are mythical creatures, and the presence and mixing suddenly of the mythical reality with the human reality is all getting churned around in this apocalypse, quite frankly. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. The rough beast is something primal, something ugly, a piece of perhaps terrible beauty, and it is undulating across earth to be born again. Moving towards death, let's say, for a cataclysm that will bring new life, an eternal return, a constant recurrence. This vision of the corruptness of civilization that in the wake of World War I, many people were grasping, and Yeats was particularly intrigued with. Yeats, who did not have much love, let's say, for politics or government or ordinary life, economics or anything like that. He liked to live for art. He was still part of the pre-Raphaelite aestheticism dream. He needed to live for art. He needed to experience beauty and all of this stuff and experience the wonder, the religious experience of art. The world was so coarse at that time, though. The reality of World War I was so coarse and horrible, so dead. And the culture that was coming out of it, a culture of economics, a culture of materialism, a culture of political identities, he's fighting against, he's pushing back on and saying, no, that's all just dreck. What I want is the divine. So he's almost willing this to happen. He's almost wishing for an apocalypse to come along and crack us all out of that. You can condemn him for that. You can say that, well, this is an awful frame of mind for him to be in. You can look to his biography and see critics who point to the 1930s as a time when he was sort of flirting with fascism a little bit as it rises in Europe. Hitler, Mussolini, who appeal to ancient myth and legend in a way that would attract somebody like Yeats, but that uses that to cover over the ugliness of their actual political ends. This poem is about a rebirth, yeah, but it's also about the destruction. And where you look at it is about reconstructing reality along your own lines. And that's the responsibility of every modernist reader. It's not just a responsibility, though. It's a challenge because the lines are opaque. The lines are difficult. And there's not a lot of lyricism here. There's some flights of fancy in the odd line here or there. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Very famous little quotation right there. Chinua Achebe gets his great novel title from there. But those isolated, atomized chunks of beauty coexist in this poem with some visions of horror and cataclysm. For Yeats and for most of the modernists, that was the modern dilemma, finding the beauty within the horror.